Hello everyone and welcome to Tips Present Teacher. This is season 2 and episode 3. And today we are going to be talking about rubrics and marking schemes for assessments. And before we start off, I just like to introduce ourselves. I am Anirudh and my co-panelist today is Ritu. And Things Education has been working in the field of teacher support and teacher professional development for the last 4 years. And we have developed quite a few online and in-person resources that teachers can use for the whole year. Some of the resources are our TEPS digital planning device, which helps you plan your lessons, create assessments, our TEPS Weekly, which is a weekly newsletter which helps you with the novel pedagogical techniques, novel techniques for classroom management, and so on. We also have online courses called TEPS courses, and we also do multiple in-person sessions depending on the schools and teachers' needs. This is Present Teacher, and after all that support, there also comes a little bit of accountability. So for the school management or school leadership, we also have the classroom observation tool and the school management report. So yes, there are trainings and professional development sessions happening. Is it actually getting translated into the classroom? Our simple classroom observation tool and the report together will give you answers to that. So yeah, now that that is out of the way, let's see what is on the plate for today. And for that, I'd like to introduce to you Ritu.
Welcome everyone. I'll quickly take you through what we are going to be talking about in this webinar today. First and foremost, we'll be talking about what rubrics are and the steps of creating rubrics. This will be both for mainly for formative assessments. The second section of this webinar will focus on how rubrics help you during formative assessments. And by formative assessments, we mean quick checks for understanding that you do during your lesson. These are not graded assessments at all. These are checks for understanding for you to understand where your students are, whether they've met the learning outcome, what you need to do to improve your lesson, to remediate, to make sure that your students are where they should be. And thirdly, very quickly, we'll be talking about how we can use these rubrics to create marking schemes for summative assessments. And by summative assessments, we mean the larger exams, the written exams where students are given marks like unit tests, like final exams. This will be a very quick section. And finally, we'll be moving on to the question and answer section where you can ask us your questions and both of us will respond to the best of our ability. And as we are doing the webinar, please also keep putting your questions into the chat box because our team will collate those questions and make sure that we answer as many as we can towards the end, at the end of the webinar. So that's what today's webinar is about. And to start off, we have a question for you. So please open up your chat box and let us know what you think a rubric is. And we're not expecting any sort of academic answer, no technical answers. We just want to know what you think of rubrics as, what their features are, what their uses are, anything that comes to mind. So yeah, let us know what you think, any words, any phrases that come to your mind quickly. Parameters for assessment. Okay, I think that's a nice, good short summary of what a rubric is. What do you think some features are? What are some parts of a rubric? Something that will help me compare my students, criteria of total marks. If you're thinking of marks and we're thinking of summative assessments, but what about formative assessments? What is the use of a rubric in class when you're just asking your students quick questions to check for understanding? Monitoring and evaluation, it's a type of assessment strategy. Okay, so we generally know that it's related to assessments. It has some criteria. We want to know where our students are at. We may not want to compare them, but we at least want to know where they are at and what we need to do to help them. The last message says checking where students are and what I can do for them. It will have learning outcomes, learning goals. So great. I think we all generally have an idea of what a rubric is. So what we'll do is we'll first just look at what the parts of a rubric are. Here we're not looking at the specific academic aspects, but just what a rubric is made up of. So like you can see, there are three main parts of a rubric. First and foremost, you should think of categories of students. There will be students who they may struggle a bit and they might not reach the learning outcome that you want them to reach, and you can place them in a category called developing, or whatever term works for you, is intuitive for you. We've used the term developing, and that is the category of students who may not completely reach the learning outcome. Secondly, we have the competent students, or the students who have met the learning outcome, and that symbol over there means that they have met the learning outcome. And thirdly, there are students who go beyond the learning outcome. That is, they've met it and they're doing something more. They might even need some extra challenge in the classroom because they're a little ahead of everyone else. So you need to have categories. Three is a good number to start with. If you think you want more, that's fine as well, but definitely not lesser than this. So those are the levels of competence that you can see right at the top of the screen. Then you have criteria, which is whether you're thinking of a topic or you're thinking of a learning outcome, you have to break that down into sub parts or sub criteria or qualitative aspects of that learning outcome. So in this case, for example, if you think of photosynthesis, there's the process of photosynthesis and the importance of photosynthesis. These are two qualitative aspects or the two criteria in this topic of photosynthesis that we want to evaluate or assess our students on. And finally, there are the actual competencies or the actual learning outcomes for these different levels and for these criteria. We'll go into these specifically, but what you need to keep in mind is that we have to have levels of the students, we need to have criteria, and these criteria need to be broken down into competencies, ideally written as learning outcomes for each level. So how do we get here? How do we make this rubric? The first step, like I already mentioned, is breaking down your topic or your learning outcome into its qualitative aspects. And we'll come to why we are constantly using the term qualitative aspects as opposed to quantitative. We'll get to that, but right now keep in mind that we want to focus on the academic aspects of a topic. So, for example, here, if we're thinking of a grade 5 classroom, we want to teach them the topic of photosynthesis. I know as a teacher that at this level, according to my chapter and according to what I've done before, the process of photosynthesis and the importance of photosynthesis are the two criteria or the two aspects of this topic. So, I've written them down. I know that these are the two things I want my students to know. So, that's step one. List these two things down. Second, you break each of your qualitative aspects or criteria into three levels of competencies or three learning outcomes, as you would, whatever you would like to call them. So like you can see, the competent level, which is in the middle, here is where the student meets the learning outcome exactly. And then there is the developing level before that, there is the extending level after that. We'll go into what these are specifically in a bit. So I've done this for the process of photosynthesis, I've done this for the importance of photosynthesis. So I've got the three levels for each of these qualitative aspects, these three competencies. So that's step two. And step three is put it all together. It's as simple as that. So you have the qualitative aspects, you list them down, you break them down. Your middle students, your competent students should meet the learning outcome. Anyone before that you have to think about where they may be struggling. Anyone after that, you have to think about what is that extra thing that they'll do academically. And that makes your rubric. Again, we'll go deeper into it. Right now, we just wanted to talk about what the parts of a rubric are and what the steps are to create this sort of table. So what we'll do now is we'll quickly do a small poll. And Anuj, would you like to take this over?
The question in the poll is that what is the first step of creating a rubric? We just spoke about it, Ritu just mentioned it. We've given you the four options on the screen. A poll will come up on your screen and you just have to select one of the options there. Okay, so we're getting a lot of responses. Thank you for your responses, and we should be able to move forward soon. Thanks. So as you can see, a lot of you have mentioned that yes, just listing down the qualitative aspects of the expected answer is the first step of creating a rubric. So great. I think most of you have gotten that. Option B, to decide how many marks to give for the correct answer. I think yes, you may want to do that for a summative assessment a little bit later, but that's not the first step for sure. So if we can move on to the, so great job everyone. So if we just move on to the next, how does a rubric help the teacher? Now we've created this rubric, it seems to be pretty straightforward. Let's see how that rubric helps. For that, let's take an example. The learning outcome here for grade 5 bunch of students is that the students will be able to explain the importance of photosynthesis for plants. Now, to test whether the students have reached this learning outcome or not, a teacher orally asks this question in the classroom. What she expects is that the students will write down this answer on a whiteboard, a small whiteboard that they have, or a small slate that they have, and then they will put it up, place it above their head and show their responses to the teacher. Now, in this case, look at the different responses that have been written down in blue on your slide. Just go through these responses for a minute and then I'll talk to you about them. These are different kinds of responses that you've seen from the students. Now let's go back to the rubric that we had created earlier. So for this, these are the three levels that I'm looking at for the student. Without having these three levels, it would be very difficult for me to start figuring out how do I even make sense of the responses that the students have given. But having these three would help me a lot. And for that, we do a quick test again. So these are the responses that the students have given. Again, put in there. Let's name the students A, B, C, D, E, and F. What I'd like you to do is tell me which students are in the developing stage, which students are in the competent stage, and which students are in the extending stage. You can just use a chat to sort of give your responses. Okay, somebody saying that B is developing, C is developing. Okay, it would be great if you could even give us some reason for why you're saying that. That will help our conversation go better as well. Okay, A is competent. Great. Someone is saying that C is vague. That's why. So I think we are getting to the. I think we are pretty accurate in our comments here. So yes. So when we say developing, we have to read that. Okay, students identify that photosynthesis is important, but they cannot provide a very good reason for it or an incomplete reason for it. So if you look at student C, they say that photosynthesis is important because plants need it. Great, that's a reason, but it's not a complete reason. Student D says it helps plants make food with sunlight. Okay, great again. Food is important, but why is food important? So they are not able to complete that thought. So that's right. So C and D would be developing. Competent would be students who are actually able to give a reason as to why food is important, essentially. So that would be, for example, student F, who says without photosynthesis, plants can't survive because they won't get the food. That's great. Now, if you look at the response that student B has given, they say that photosynthesis is important because it helps plants grow and also gives oxygen to animals and people to breathe. So now that means that and some of you have even said that they are not just telling you about the importance of photosynthesis to the plant, but they are also thinking about the importance of photosynthesis and linking it to the broader system, which is the ecosystem or the water cycle or air, the pollution in the air, etc. So they are making those connections also. And when they are making the connections, they are going beyond what was expected of them at their competency levels. So this is so being able to clearly demarcate students by having these clearly demarcated levels of what the student should do makes it easier for a teacher to quickly assess which students are still developing, which students have reached their competency or the learning outcome, and which students have reached and going further from what is actually expected of them at this level. So now, to summarize what we have just said, I would like Ritu to come in here, please.
So, like he said, just to summarize what the use of a rubric is, how it helps the teacher. First and foremost, it helps you make focused observations. So, if you have the rubric with you, you know exactly what you're looking for. You're asking a question. Students are giving a variety of answers, like you saw in on those whiteboards. But you know, thanks to the rubric, what you need to look for in those answers. Is it vague? Is it incomplete? Is it deep enough? Is it connected to a broader system? Is it just generally about using some vague terms about growth or about needing it or the importance of it, or is it specific enough for that particular learning outcome? So one is that it enables focused observation. Second, it enables efficient observation. So if you're using it in your classroom and a different teacher's teaching the same topic in another section, you can use the same rubric, and it helps you standardize what you're doing across classrooms. You can use it year after year. Of course, as you do it more and more, you'll become better at it. You might tweak the rubric, but it makes the process very, very efficient. So once you've done it, once you've made the rubric, you know it so well that it becomes a very efficient process. Thirdly, these are formative assessments. These are about ensuring that students meet the learning outcome. And if we have these rubrics with us, we can give them very, very specific targeted feedback. Instead of just saying something like, your answer needs a little bit of improvement, we can tell them specific things like, you're talking about photosynthesis in very general terms, but tell me specifically how it helps the plant. What does it really do? Or, yes, you've met the learning outcome, let's go beyond and tell me how it helps others in the ecosystem. So it enables you to give very specific feedback. And finally, again, formative assessments are about helping you as a teacher as well. It helps you understand what you need to focus on in the rest of that lesson. If you see that most of your students are at a developing level, you know that you need to get them to the competent level. This is where they're struggling. This is how I need to tweak my lesson plan. And similarly, it helps you for future lessons that I know that my students struggle if I use this technique or use this approach, or this topic always is a struggle with my students. And so for future lessons, this is how I'll tweak what I do. So again, keeping in mind that all of these rubrics are to ensure that students are reaching a learning outcome. It's not about marks. It's not about grading them at this point. So it's for you. It's for your students. All of you. So this is how rubrics help a teacher. Like earlier, what we'd like to do is do a quick poll so that you can see how much of it you've grasped, if you have any questions, any doubts. So the poll should show up on your screen in a few seconds. It's basically just talking about what we just said. Why is it useful to use a rubric during classroom assessment? What is the need? The poll is on your screen. You can select the right answer, A, B, C, or D. So great. I think majority of you, most of you have said, see, why is it useful to use a rubric during classroom assessment? Because it helps the teacher focus on what to look for in her students or his students' responses and plan next steps. Because finally, it's about planning better, about ensuring that all students reach the learning outcome. Option A, which is about ensuring students all give similar looking answers, that's not really the aim of a rubric. Students can give answers that look different, that use different words, that use synonyms of the same keyword, and that's fine because the point is to see if they've understood. So even if their answers look different, as long as they are aligned to the learning, that is fine. And that is completely okay, in fact, because that means that they're thinking on their own and they're not just copying textbook answers. B, it makes grading faster by focusing only on the final answer. Again, in formative assessments, in classroom assessments, the aim is not to grade students. The aim is to see whether they've reached the learning outcome and what we as a teacher can do to get them there. So grading is not really the focus here. And D, it takes away the need to explain feedback to students. It definitely makes it easier to give feedback to students because if you have this common rubric in front of you and if you show students this is what we were expecting, this is what is missing, and this is what you need to do, that's always helpful. But it definitely doesn't take away the need to explain feedback because we still need to give that feedback to students and explain it. They're not at the level that we are at. So yes, it's useful to have rubrics because it helps us focus on what to plan for, what to look for, and then how to plan the next steps. We're going to move on to the next bit, which is about features of good rubrics, and I'll hand it back to Anand over here.
Yeah, thanks, Ritu. I think to understand what are the good features of a good rubric, we need to look at, sometimes we just need to look at what is a bad rubric. And I'm telling you at the outset that this is a bad rubric. The learning outcome is that students will be able to list key features of tropical evergreen forests. This is for grade 6. And let's just focus on the rubric right now. And there are again 3 levels, and for each level the description has been given for the criteria that the students will be able to list features of tropical evergreen forests. So I would just like to know from you in the chat what makes this rubric not great. Yeah, I think some of you are getting it right. That okay, I mean, no need to include some grammar or spellings component. Someone saying that no thinking is happening. Fair. The purpose of learning is absent. Yeah. So I think a lot of you are getting one of the features which are completely off right in the chat. It should be around the central learning outcome. Absolutely agree. Okay. So great. I think there's been a decent number of responses that we have gotten. Just to point out a few things apart from what you already mentioned. Rubrics, as we mentioned right at the start, are qualitative. The moment you make them quantitative, it kind of goes into the realm of marking schemes or things that you want to grade students on. If a student can give one feature, I'll give them half a point. If a student can name 2 features, I'll give them 1 mark, and so on. So let's stay just in the realm of formative assessment and rubric, where we're trying to understand how much the student has learned. It's better if you don't actually list down a number of things that the student can recall. So, which goes back to one of the chats that said that there's no thinking involved. It's just like 1 feature, 2 feature, things like that. Okay. I think all of you got the point that why do we need to assess spellings and grammar in a science class? Absolutely fair. That's not needed. I think one subtle point that is also there is if you look at the competent part of this rubric, it says that students understand three features of evergreen forests. Now, the word understands is ambiguous, so to speak, in the sense that understanding is something that is happening internally. The student needs to do something externally to tell us that he or she understands. So, having a word like understands, the verb there should be avoided. Similarly, in the extending part, it says that student knows five features. Knows, again, whether a student knows or not is internal. How are we going to externalize this or make this understanding visible or make this knowledge visible to us while we are trying to assess students? So the words that we use become very important. So now what we'll do is I will now have the same responses that students have given and show you a good rubric along with that. Now this is a decent rubric, and again there are six students who have responded in six different ways. What I'd like you to do in the chat is tell us that which student falls in which level of competency. And as you can see, we have removed the numbers from it. We have removed the invisible things like understanding and knowledge, which is internal, and made it external by saying that no, they should list the key features and reflect the unique nature. So specific things that a student can do and show, which kind of is the signal that the students have understood or they have the knowledge of this. Okay, F is competent, C is developing. Okay, so there are some features C is developing. Fair. F is extending. Okay, I think we are we're very clear between developing and competent or more. So I think that developing part let's not focus on, but I think all of you have a lot of you have gotten it right. A lot of these students, student E, student C, are in the developing phase. You're right. With the competent, as long as they're listing out things or listing out features of a tropical evergreen forest, they will be competent. But the minute they start making links to anything that is related to climate or location or biodiversity, like students A and F have done, then they should be categorized as extending, which now a few of you have also suggested. So great, I think we are doing a good job of figuring out where the students are lying, and all of this is possible if you can get a simple rubric like this right. If you do this, it's going to become extremely easy for you to grade students, figure out the levels of the students, and become extremely easy for you to understand what to do with the students next. So with that, again, just to go through what are the features of a good rubric, I'd like to invite you to again.
Thanks, Anirudh. And I think that was great. We got a lot of responses. The clarity of the responses was great because most of you were able to say exactly where the students lie. So if we compare the bad rubric that we saw before this and then the good rubric, what is it that changed? And what is it that makes a good rubric? First and foremost, and what someone already mentioned in the chat box was that it has to be aligned to the learning outcome. So if a learning outcome, if this is about geography and it's about tropical evergreen forests and their features, the grammar and the spelling aren't aspects on which we should assess students. They're important. You can point them out to students and you can ask them to be more careful. But it doesn't really show the level of understanding if they've gotten everything else right. So it needs to be aligned to the learning outcome, which also means that the quantitative aspect of it is not really important. What is more important is the qualitative aspect, the academic aspect of how deep their understanding is. This can also be phrased as we want to focus on their performance on that learning outcome and not the task. So it's not about their grammar and their spelling. It's not about whether they've made neat bullet points before each point and written it down. That is more about the task, the actual operations of the task, but it's not about their academic understanding. So first and foremost, you have to keep in mind that the learning outcome is the most important and all your competencies should be aligned to the learning outcome. Secondly, again, like someone mentioned, it's also important for your students to know the rubrics because they need to know where they need to be. Uh, and so it's important for you to write the rubrics in a clear and simple to understand manner, for you to be able to read it quickly, for another teacher to be able to use that rubric, and very importantly, for your students to be able to refer to those rubrics when they're learning, when they're performing, when they're answering these questions in class. Thirdly, like we already discussed, it needs to include observable criteria. So if you use verbs like student will understand, student will know, those are not things that we can observe. What we can observe are things that students actually do. Are they able to list all the criteria? Are they able to, sorry, all the features? Are they able to explain them, describe them, draw them? Those are things that we can observe. So if you just write understand, it's very gray, it's very vague. You don't really know what to look for. So very importantly, look for verbs that you can use verbs that you can observe that students will actually have to do externally. And lastly, like we've already discussed, these competencies should be placed on a continuum of quality from low to high. So we've said that it needs to go from developing to competing to extending, but more importantly, it needs to be quality and not quantity. Like we discussed, it's not about whether a student can list one feature and three features and five features. That doesn't really show the depth of understanding. The depth of understanding comes from the quality of their responses. If they're able to use the right terms, they're able to make connections, that's what shows the depth of their understanding. So these are what the features of a good rubric are, and there may be more. These are the most important. What we'd like you to now do is quickly read what the question on the screen. It's a little long, but it's what we just discussed. So read the learning outcome and tell us which one is task focused rather than performance focused. Okay, so I think the results are live, and most respondents have said option B, that is, this is the criteria, that is task focused. Student uses neat handwriting and colors the planets carefully. So the learning outcome is if students should be able to describe the key features of the solar system. Option B, which is about neat handwriting and careful coloring, is not really going to tell us if they have understood the key features of the solar system. If it was about the correct color, that is important because a student shouldn't be coloring the earth red. It means that there's some fundamental misunderstanding about what the earth is. But careful coloring is not that important. Even if they go out of the lines, the handwriting is not that great. That's fine as long as the rest of it, as long as the learning outcome is met. So let's look at option A. The size and position of each planet in the solar system is a key feature of the solar system. So students should be able to do this. This is aligned to the learning outcome. Option C, which is about their composition, the atmosphere, the orbit, even if it's comparison, whatever the verb is, it's focusing on the key features of the solar system. And so this is performance focused. This is aligned to the learning outcome. And option D, which is the order of the planets from the sun, labeling them correctly. Again, it's a key feature of the solar system. This is aligned to the learning outcome. What is not necessary to the learning outcome is whether they're writing neatly or not writing neatly, whether their coloring is neat or whether they've just done a superficial job of coloring it outside the lines or not fully coloring it. That's fine as long as it's correct. So this is what we mean by task focused versus performance focused. What you need to focus on is the learning outcome, and that tells you which is which. So great, thank you for all your responses. We'll quickly move on to the next bit, which is marking schemes. Now, so far we have spoken about formative assessments or assessments that we do in the classroom as checks for understanding, to get feedback from students, to give feedback to students, to make sure that everyone is moving towards the learning outcome in class. Now we've moved on to summative assessments, or those written exams which are graded like unit tests, like final exams, and those are the ones that are marked. And so we're going to see how we can use rubrics for those marking schemes. And just to give you some context, there are a variety of assessment items, types of assessment items that you can use in summative assessments. They're all listed on the screen. Some of them are closed response, some of them are open response. Today we're going to focus on just the last two, that is short answer questions and long answer questions. We can create rubrics for multiple choice and match the following, and true and false. All of that is possible. Today, that is not what we're going to focus on. We're only focusing on the short and long answer questions, which are usually a little more difficult or more time consuming, if not more difficult. So that's what we're going to look at. Again, keep in mind that this is about summative assessments or written graded exams. Now, this is a grade 9 story, a grade 9 English story. where and we've asked students in that final exam or in that unit test to write a character analysis of this character from the story by this author. So they know the story, they know what a character analysis involves because we're assuming that they know it because we've done it in class, they've got this in the textbook, they've done it in their notebook, they've practiced it, and so on. So they know what it is, you've given them this question, and this student that you see at the bottom has written this answer in their answer sheet. So the question now is that we've allotted 10 marks to this question. How do we decide where the student is? How many marks the student should get? That's the question. That's what is most time consuming. And if you have any ideas, we'd love to see them in the chat. What do you think? What would you do? Okay. So what do we do in this case? Before this, we already discussed 3 steps of creating rubrics. So we said that there have to be 3 levels: developing, competent, and extending. There have to be all of the different criteria or qualitative aspects, and then you break down your learning outcome into these 3 levels and different criteria. A marking scheme is basically a rubric with marks assigned to the different levels and to the different criteria. Um, I'm going to spend a couple of minutes on this slide to clarify a couple of things. A student who meets all the requirements at the competent level, that is, they've met the learning outcome, they've met all the requirements of the learning outcome, they are the students who will get full marks. So you can see that this was a 10-mark question, and this, if a child meets all these criteria, then they are getting 10 marks. A student who is at a developing level will get slightly lesser marks, and a, a student who's at an extending level, it really depends on what your school is okay with, what the policy is. But what you need to keep in mind is that competent students will get the full marks. Your extending students could either get bonus marks if your school allows for that, for going above and beyond the learning outcome, or they will get maybe you can give them some written feedback, some written appreciation of this is what the question asked for, and you've gone above and beyond and done this. You've talked about the internal struggles, you've written very fluently, you've chosen really relevant evidence. Whatever the rubric says, you can give them written feedback to acknowledge that they've done that. So those are a couple of different options of how you can deal with the extending level. But keep in mind that competent is where your students will get full marks. Another thing that I'd like to point out is that the marks don't always have to be this standard. You can change how you're allocating marks to the different levels as long as this column finally adds up to the total marks. So this is just an example. Finally, it's up to you depending on how much weightage you want to give to each of the different criteria. So like I said, we've already looked at how to build a rubric. Allocating marks to the different levels and different criteria is how you create a marking scheme. So based on this, if we go back to the answer that this child wrote, this is how you use a marking scheme. You look at their answer, you tick whatever is applicable to their answer. So here in this case, we can see that the student showed good understanding of the character. He was at the competent level, and there was coherence and organization to his answer. But when it came to use of evidence from the text, when it came to depth of analysis, when it came to the use of language and expression, it wasn't really there. It wasn't really meeting the learning outcome. So we placed him at the developing level. And if you add up the marks, it comes to 7 on 10. So this kind of an approach makes it much easier for you to evaluate your student's answer instead of letting biases come in the way or your own perspective of the student come in the way, or if someone else has to mark this paper for you and they know exactly what you're looking for. This is what the rubric helps with. This is what the marking scheme helps with. So yeah, just to sum up, a marking scheme is basically a larger rubric in which you allocated marks, with the competent level getting full marks. So I would like to again call Anuj to quickly summarize what we've talked about in today's session. Anuj, over to you.
Thank you, Ritu. I think that was extremely informative. Just a couple of clarifications before we get to the summary. Using rubrics firstly, creating rubrics as a teacher is pretty time consuming. But I think it is extremely important because once you do it, it is something that will help you at every stage of your teaching journey. So what I mean by that is it helps you with getting a very good idea whether the student is understanding, is learning, where the students are, how many students have learned, and then that kind of gives you very quick feedback as to how you need to change or you don't need to change your style of teaching or what kind of style is working for which students. Apart from that, as you can see that if we take the route of using a rubric and creating and using that to create a marking scheme, then it becomes extremely quick for you again. So you've done the hard work or the long work right at the beginning, then everything else kind of becomes easier for you and becomes more straightforward for you. And the third thing is that a rubric, and I think we mentioned this a couple of times, but I just want to underline and underscore this point that when you create a rubric, you have a copy, and it's great to give your students also a copy of it so that they know what is expected of them. They know what is going to be valued in the classroom. And then a more practical aspect of this is that once the student knows and they have a copy in their hands, they take it back home to the parents. And the PTMs, the difficult PTMs that you have, the parent-teacher meetings of asking why did my child score 1 mark less than the other person, or I think this answer is right. Having such kind of rubrics make these PTMs also extreme, well, at least a little bit more easy is what we feel. So, having said that, let's just summarize what we spoke about today. We started by talking about what are the steps of creating a rubric, how do we actually go about the process, and also hopefully we also covered as to why rubrics are important and especially why rubrics are important in the teaching learning process. And then at the end of the learning process, when we come to the summative assessments, we also looked at how rubrics can be important to make it into a marking scheme. And we also spoke about all the features of a good rubric, which we discussed in at length today. So, with that, I think we are done with the R portion of talking of the webinar. But before we close from our end, just want to let you know we have a multiple online courses on assessments, on formative assessments, on how to use rubrics, etc. And we are adding to these courses all the time. So please go visit TEPS courses and see if anything appeals to you there. We'll share a link with you at the end of the webinar, and we will definitely share a link for the kind of sorry, we will share a link about the with the recording of this webinar in case you want to go back to it at some point of time. And along with that, there will also be links to the courses that we just mentioned. So with that, I'm going to take a pause and let's take some questions.
So the first question is, doesn't it take too much time for teachers to read rubrics and assess them?
I think if you make the rubric, you'll know it pretty well. It's not something that is going to be difficult to read or difficult to comprehend. So it is important. It is very important for you to write the learning outcome, for you to make the rubric yourself. And if you know the key things, this is what I want to look for at the competent level students, this is what I want to look for in developing and extending, it should be straightforward. But yes, the key here is to make the rubric on your own, to know exactly what you want to see. And the rubric, then the sheet of paper, whatever it is, maybe it's up on the screen. You have a screen in your classroom. You keep it up so that all students can see it. You can see it. Everyone's on the same page. But ideally, no. If you have put in that effort to make the rubric, it shouldn't be too difficult at that point.
So another question is why it is important to share rubrics with students. Are there any expectations?
Yeah, I think that is the whole point. That you tell the students right out at the outset that hey, these are the expectations that we have. This is where we want you to be, and that in a non-pressure environment, I think is very useful for the student. As to they know that hey, I'm here. I know these many things about photosynthesis, but I don't know A, B, and C, or I don't know. I am not very clear about how this photosynthesis is helping the ecosystem. I understand that it's giving food to the plant, but how is it giving food to me? I don't know that at a grade 5 level. Then the student is very clear about where and what they need to do, and that is kind of setting expectations for the students. And as long as you do it in a low pressure environment, I think it's a positive overall.
So another question is what are some common mistakes that should be avoided when designing rubrics for assessments?
Yeah, I think Ritu, we just put up that same slide if needed, and then you just go through that.
Right. So I hope you can see this. I'm going to just quickly show you the bad rubric again. First and foremost, it's focused on quantity, 1 feature, 3 features, 5 features. That's not something that really tells us depth of understanding. It only tells us memory. Secondly, I mean, if a student writes three features, but they're not really deep and they're not really showing deep understanding, it's not very helpful. Secondly, something that is not aligned with the learning outcome is is not again helpful. For example, here we're focusing on the spelling, the grammar. This is not really the focus of geography. Again, you can point it out to students, you can let them know that they need to be more careful, but it doesn't really affect their understanding of geography. If you have words like understand and know, those are not observable, so that is something that should be avoided. You should use words like list and explain, describe, draw, something that you can see. And like we just discussed, it's something that you should be sharing with students, sharing with parents. So it needs to be written in very, very clear, simple language, no technical, academic language that is difficult for any other person to understand. So I think those are the main things. And of course, like the poll that we did, focus on the performance, don't focus on the other peripheral things like their handwriting, like how carefully they've written it or how neatly they've written it. Those things are important, but it's not related to their understanding.
So we have like three, four questions around this, which is how do we design a rubric for early years?
I would say it's the same. It's exactly the same process. Your learning outcomes have to be extremely clear. If the worry is that what are the learning outcomes, understandable, you can head over to teps.school. We'll send that link to you towards the end. And you can find all possible learning outcomes that you need for early learning across all the domains, right from fine motor to numeracy to STEM. And once you have those learning outcomes with you, you have to break them down into developing, competent, extending. It's the exact same process. Here you will be focused more on their you have to get them to do things. So, for example, if you're trying to see if their fine motor skills have developed, of course, they're not going to be writing answers for you. You then have to go around and observe what part of their hands they're using or how they're using their wrist, their fingers, whatever it is. So, these are going to be observational in the sense of you're going to see what students are doing and how they are orally speaking or whatever it is, rather than having them write answers. So, that would be the main difference in how you actually do it in the classroom. But the process of creating a rubric should ideally be the same. If you have more specific questions about this part of it, please put them into chat so that we can answer them. But the first thing that came to mind was that making rubrics in early years is difficult because learning outcomes are vague. And so that's what I responded.
So another question is how detailed the rubrics should be.
So I'll try to answer this, and Ritu, you can add to this if you want. It's a very broad question, so my first part of the answer is going to be broad. That the rubric should be as detailed as possible, but not more than that. And that is kind of, I'm just flipping it around for the question like asker. But see, the point is that you are looking, you know what kind of performance is expected for the learning outcome to be met. So a very practical tip that I got very early on in my rubric creation stage was that your competent level, or the level where you're saying that the students have met their learning outcomes, is essentially writing down that learning outcome itself, and then modifying it to see what kind of modifying it based on the kind of performance task that you're the students to assess whether they have reached the learning outcome or not. And when you do it that way, when you put constraints on it from a learning outcome point of view, and then another constraint of what the performance is going to be for me to see whether the student has understood or not, that kind of puts the constraints, and that kind of gives you the ideal level of information, and doesn't make it too dense to then process this information and understand where the student is at in terms of their learning.
Is performance focused rubrics always going to be precedence over task focused?
If again, I'm going to just infer from that question and assume that you're worried about the neatness and other aspects of learning that are important. If it's a part of your learning outcome, if you want to focus on it, make it a part of your learning outcome. For example, if in the planets thing I wanted students to draw the solar system, and I specifically told them that it needs to be neat, it needs to be understandable by someone else, by someone who doesn't know. You're showing it to a pre-primary student, they need to understand it, or a grade 4, grade 3 student, they need to understand it. It becomes a part of your evaluation then. Also, students know that that is something they need to focus on. That's what I would say. Yes, performance is more important than task, but as a teacher, we also want to make sure that students are writing neatly, presenting neatly. It can be taken up separately. It can be made clear to students that is expected of them. As long as that is made clear to students, and you're not judging them on something that they were not aware of. I think that is key here. That I thought I needed to just color the earth right. I didn't know I needed to color it neatly. That's where students feel it's unfair. And that's where I think we're judging them unfairly. So just making it clear to them that this is what we're expecting from you is what we're trying to say here. Anud, anything that you want to add here?
Yeah, I would also like to clarify what we were talking about when we say task versus performance. Now, see, from one lens, you can always say that drawing is a task, also, correct? It's how you see it, and I think that's where we kind of clarified that when we are saying performance, it means performance linked to the learning outcome. Now, if one of your learning outcomes is that, and in lower grades it's possible that this is one of the learning outcomes, that the student knows how to write in a specific manner, whether it's cursive or understands cases and all of that. If that is your learning outcome, fair, that should be part of the rubric, part of the assessment and the rubric. However, when you're doing a science lesson, for example, is it really important? And that's the difference that we were talking about when we were talking about task versus performance. I think to answer the previous question, I literally said what is the performance task that we are giving the student. So we get the confusion, but the biggest difference here is that tasks are peripheral to the learning outcome. Performance is hardcore, based on the learning outcomes.
Yeah, addressing the same answer, there's one more question. How will rubrics help English tutors if we are ignoring English, spelling and grammar?
So as English teachers, you're not ignoring spelling and grammar because it will be a part of your learning outcome, ideally. It will be part of your rubric. It is the responsibility of the language teacher, whether it's English or Hindi or whatever language you're teaching. It is the responsibility of that teacher to make sure that spelling and grammar is right, and therefore geography and history and maths teachers shouldn't be worrying too much about it. So yes, your as an English tutor, your learning outcome, your rubric needs to include a focus on spelling and grammar. In fact, the example that we shared at the end with the marking scheme, language and expression was a part of the rubric because it is important for students in a language exam to take care of these things. So that should definitely not be ignored in these subjects.
One question is lesson planning could be done in rubric. I think they're asking if lesson planning can be done simultaneously with rubrics or using rubrics.
Yes, that should be the first step of your lesson plan. Put down your learning outcome, break it down into the rubric, the three levels, and ensure that you're getting students to, you're planning to get students to the competent level. Keep in mind where you're developing students will struggle. Keep in mind that there will be students at an extending level who will need extra challenge, so you can push them to with questions that will get them to that level. Rubric should be the first step of lesson planning, is what I would say.
So thanks a lot. Thanks everyone for your amazing participation. I think this has been the most participative webinar that we've had, and we're doing this live because you have told us that we want interaction, we want questions answered, etc. We did an entire season of recorded records, but now we've changed this. We're trying to do this live, and believe me, it's a great challenge for us. But we're still trying to do it, and we want you to keep coming back and interacting with us, and that is what gives us the energy to do it over and over again. So our next webinar is going to be on 9th May, and don't worry, all of you will get the information about it soon. And so thanks a lot again for tuning in, and look forward to seeing you again. And thank you to Dia, Volga, and Srishti for keeping this extremely professional and seamless. Thanks everybody, and see you soon.